Well, I think part of the will to live is biological. The other has to do with, there is a story that, and you've heard the story and you've heard me say the story plenty of times, but, the Greeks have this story of Pandora's box, that Pandora is getting married to, I think, Epimetheus, Prometheus' brother, who stole fire from the heavens to bring it down to human beings. And so Zeus, knowing well that Pandora is really, really curious, and she goes to places she shouldn't usually go, but she goes nevertheless. And because I think Zeus has something against the human being, in the sense that, Prometheus assumed wrongly, of course, that human beings have the capacity for enlightenment, for truth, for understanding, for wisdom. And Prometheus didn't know that that's actually not a human capacity. We don't really know what to do with truth and wisdom and enlightenment and all those things. And history has kind of revealed that to be true for the most part. If you look at the fate of many of humanity's heroes, beginning with Gilgamesh, and going down the line with Moses and Jesus and Muhammad and Malcolm X and Gandhi, their life has been very, very difficult and challenging. And so to kind of punish human beings and punish humanity and punish the marriage of Prometheus' brother, he makes his brother's life, a living hell. So they get married, Epimetheus and Pandora, and he gives her a box. And on the box, it says, congratulations, don't open. Knowing full well that Pandora will no doubt open the box. It's very much like God in the Garden of Eden telling Adam and Eve that go all sorts of places except over there where that tree lives. It's kind of like telling the kids, go anywhere except the fridge because there is ice cream there. You lay the trap. And then you punish the kids for going there, which just doesn't make any sense, but that's the way it is. Maybe you just want to spank the kids. You just need to find a good excuse. So after the marriage ceremony, Pandora goes to this box, given to her as a gift by Zeus, and she's very, very curious. And so she opens the lid. And all sorts of nonsense comes out of it. Anger and vengeance and resentment, perhaps greed and lust, all the 7 deadly sins. The very last component to come out is hope. But the moment hope desires to come out, Pandora closes the box, the lid. Or maybe the lid just closes on its own, and hope never comes out. And you can take the story in a variety of different ways. First, the box is made by Zeus. Zeus has placed a lot of gifts inside this box, by himself, on his own. The gifts are negative as well as positive. And so from one perspective, you can say that many of our time, of human life, is spent by trying to manage some of the poison that has come out of this box, greed and lust and anger and vengeance and resentment and laziness and all that stuff. And so most of our life is basically spent about those things. That's why, for the most part, we are really not worthy of the light that Prometheus, or fire, wanted to bring down here and gift it to us. Even if you had light, even if you had a flashlight, you would use it for what exactly? To find perhaps a TV remote, to find another, where to go smoke, where to go to drink, all the useless things that human beings do. And maybe what lives inside this hope is maybe the light or the fire that Zeus has hidden in it. I don't really know because the story doesn't say. But if you were to kind of just focus on hope, consider for a moment, the people who come to this class, or people who come to any class, or people who do anything in life. Why is Ra carrying that chessboard around? It's heavy, it's cumbersome. And he's hoping that maybe on the bus, maybe on the train, maybe as he's walking around campus, someone will tell him, oh, I play chess as well. See, there is zoning. And so what you have is, he gets up very early in the morning. There is really nothing to do. He's not really looking forward to the class. He only hopes that maybe someone will say, let's sit and play chess. It's the hope that, brings us lots of desires to continue with life. But when you open hope in itself, open it and see what lives inside it, it's really quite ridiculous and nonsensical. Consider, for example, the many sages and prophets you've talked about in this class, whether it's Gilgamesh, whether it's Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Lao Tzu, Malcolm X, Gandhi, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. What all these people really have, the common denominator, is that they were onto something. They understood something very, very profound. Simple, but very profound. And the only thing they really wanted to do was to share that insight with other people. Not so much as a belief system, not so much as a way to bring them comfort, at least not initially, but because it comes as a jolt, as a shock to your psyche. And then you realize that, in the end, despite all the hopes and dreams that they may have had about their original goal and purpose, hello Julian, everything turns upside down. Moses leaves, Socrates kind of gets crucified by his people, Muhammad gets into fights. Even, for example, let's say you have a father or you have a mother who happens to be addicted to drugs or alcohol, or even if you have a student who doesn't come to class very often, or if they come, they're always late, if they're always here on time, they're really never listening. Even if you were to tell them, what is going on with you, man? You want to fail this class? And so what happens, it's light. You're trying to kind of shed some light into what's happening. And because the semester is ending, that if there's anything they want to do, they should do it now before, things get out of hand. And you realize that instead of embracing this truth, they kind of become offended and say, why are you saying this to me in front of everybody? It makes no sense. And you realize that despite all the hopes and dreams that you may have had, when the lid opens, it's not the hope that comes out. It's not illumination or enlightenment or light or fire where you can see things clearly come out. It's all the anger, all the resentment that come out, My father is a very, very nice man. And he has always enjoyed this political group. And we all enjoyed in the 1970s and 80s because they were really one of the few leftist groups who stood up to the Shah, the regime. But that was 40 years ago. Now the leaders of this particular organization, they're old, they can't walk. One of them is just missing in action. We haven't seen him for, I don't know, maybe 20 years now. And yet my father is very, very passionate about this particular group, even though they're completely useless. They have no utility. No one cares for them. No one believes in them. No one desires what they desire. And yet my father is very passionate about them. Why? Well, because my father doesn't really enjoy examining his position in regards to this group. He has this belief system. That belief system gives him a purpose, meaning, and every time you try to kind of turn on the flashlight and tell him what lives inside his hope and dream, he's very kind. He's 90 almost, so he kind of sits back and listens and laughs. But at the end of the day, you come to realize it's best to just let him talk what he wants to talk, And it's also very cruel to kind of try to change his mind at this age. at this stage in his life. But going back to your question as to why, can I talk to you about the Gospel of Judas? It's a really, really interesting book because it deals with your question as to what is it about human life that despite you having this great understanding that life really has nothing else to offer you, why do we continue going? You've been with an alcoholic, it's not going well, but you always hope that perhaps this particular bumper sticker, this particular book, this particular conversation, this particular church will kind of transform him. And you'll keep doing that for at least 20, 30, 40, 50 years until you just kind of worn out. What makes the Gospel of Judas very, very, very interesting for me, first, it's a new discovery. It was written around, I think, 180 years after Christ. The Gospel of Mark is about 40 years after Christ. The Gospel of Luke is about 50 years after Christ. The Gospel of, Matthew is 40, 50 years after Christ. The Gospel of Luke is about 60 years. And the Gospel of John, anywhere from 80 to 120 years. And so the Gospel of Judas is about 180 years. And they're all giving us different perspective about who this man is, what he said, what his missionary work was. So there are lots of inconsistencies in the books. So if you were to kind of replace Jesus with wisdom, forget Jesus, okay? Just say, what happens to wisdom in the Gospel of Mark? Wisdom gets beaten up really, really bad. Wisdom is always bloodied, never understood, always put on the cross, because it's much easier for people to just live a slothful, comfortable life that revolves around belief systems that don't really mean anything, that don't have much substance or depth. It's a belief system nevertheless. Okay? It's like the earth is flat. Even though science will tell you it's round, perhaps, you won't believe it. Why? Because the belief system that the earth is flat keeps you grounded psychologically. So, any of you in this class who have gone through certain life experiences, and those experiences have, given you some insights, wisdom about anything, try sharing that wisdom with your friends. Try sharing that wisdom with your companion. Try sharing it with anyone you can find. And, you may inspire them. They may say, wow, that's really, really interesting, but they won't buy it. It won't become part of their belief system. It won't be something that will transform them. Inspiration is very cheap. You can be inspired by all sorts of things. It just doesn't have a very long shelf life. So that's wisdom in the Gospel of Mark. That despite you wanting to go out there telling people how things are, you realize you just get beaten up, So, so that basically becomes a foundation of any wisdom, whether you're a Buddhist, a Christian, an alcoholic who's recovered, a drug addict who's recovered, a woman who's been in a marriage but divorced because the husband was crummy or the wife was crummy, whatever the case may be, that you have these nuggets of understanding, okay? So wisdom is always alone and it always gets bruised. That's what wisdom eventually, it happens to it, okay? So then you have the Gospel of Matthew. And the assumption is, well, my husband is the closest person to me. My daughter is the closest person to me. My father is. So let me share my wisdom to the people who are closest to me. And what you have in the Gospel of Matthew is that it says to you, listen, people very, very close to you will never get it. It's impossible. No prophet is ever welcome in his own town. And you could look at this in a variety of different ways. Even if you have wisdom, and even if the wisdom that you have, you desire to transform your own self, you realize that inside you is a town, it's a village, filled with various occupants. You have belief systems, you have friends, you have this, you have that. And even if you have this wisdom that's strong to kind of shed this light inside you, there are these other personalities inside you, other desires and ambitions that you have that will eventually turn off this light. So even you are not welcome into your own home, do you see? It's kind of like when you go home and your room is a mess and something about you says, clean up your room, God damn it, don't go anywhere, don't pick up your phone, don't have parties with anyone, just clean your room. If it means staying here for like a week and a half, cleaning your room, just do it. And then after a while, you have a guest named laziness. It comes in, then boredom comes in, then sloth comes in. You have all sorts of guests coming in and saying, yeah, it's a great piece of wisdom that you have cleaning your room, but maybe another day. So what you have in the Gospel of Matthew is basically that first wisdom gets beaten up in the Gospel of Mark, and it gets beaten up first and foremost by people closest to you. So just in case you think that you can go to your mom and dad and your friends and tell them what lives inside you, don't. You'll get beaten up. Then you say, well, if wisdom gets bruised on a daily basis, and if I want to tell it to people closest to me, they will misunderstand and abuse me even further, maybe I should tell them to people who don't know. I'll just open myself up to anybody who's willing to listen. Okay? And you realize now what you're doing is you're putting your emotional body like a prostitute into the hands of other people. Anyone who pretends that they're willing to listen, you say your stuff. And in the end, you realize people closest to you don't listen, don't understand. People not close to you, not even in your bloodline, listen to your understanding. So first, wisdom lives alone. When you want to share it, it gets bruised up. When you want to share it with people who are not of your blood, it also gets beaten up. Then you get to the Gospel of John. And the Gospel of John is a very interesting book in the sense that you will not find a single story. Not a single story. I mean, that in itself is profoundly fascinating. I mean, if you've been telling stories in Mark, Matthew, Luke, why not continue the same line of teaching to people? Whether it's the author of the Gospel of John, maybe whoever wrote this particular gospel lived at a time where nobody really cared for stories. They lived like in a Wiccan community where it's all about magic and witchcraft. Because what you have in this particular gospel is Jesus just doing all sorts of crazy things, He raises the dead, he turns water into wine. He's basically a really, really good magician. And my guess is, you've had wisdom being shared in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke in the spoken word. It's kind of like when you go online and you listen to the dream speech of Martin Luther King Jr., and there is something magical in the words. But then in the Gospel of John, you have a Jesus who says, or you have wisdom who says, yeah, I'm just tired of telling stories to people. They never understand it. There is something just flawed about the human being and the human condition that they're like tax collectors. They leave the good stuff in the story and they always take out the bad things in the story. And the bad things that they take out of the stories is to serve their own purpose. It's what they call selective hearing. It's like me standing here talking about this stuff for an hour and 10 minutes. And you only focus on what I said like at 9:35. I said, we've been sitting here for an hour and 10 minutes. Why do you live like at 9:35? He said, well, what you said didn't rub me the wrong way. I said, come on, man. We've talked about all these other things. What's wrong with you? And what you have is first you exercise selective hearing, then you get consumed by that little tiny thing that you've heard. And so you miss everything else. So when it comes to teacher-student relationship, you become completely useless. You have no use for wisdom. So in the Gospel of John, what you have is a man who says, I'm just tired. I'm tired of talking to people. I'm tired of them not understanding anything. I'm tired of, even if you read the Gospel of Mark very closely, this guy has done so many wonderful things for his disciples. And so, they're on the river or the sea and there's a tornado. And the disciples are really, really frightened that they're going to drown. And Jesus says to them, I've done all these things for you. And you guys just don't have any faith. What's wrong with you, man? What else do I need to do to prove to you that I have control over above and below? You can rest in me. You can have your trust in me. But no, that's not the way they work. That's basically... If you want to consider yourself to be a disciple, you should think of yourself as the disciples, not as Jesus Christ, not as someone who understands. Okay? So, as a disciple, you should always say that you're going to be in doubt, you're going to lose your faith, you're always going to misunderstand, and you're going to beat up wisdom on a daily basis because it doesn't serve you. And you're always engaged in selective hearing because it serves you. You're like a tax collector. When someone knocks on your door as a tax collector, they don't really care how you are, what your life is, how your family is. They want to know, you owe them some money, and so they're only interested in the money. Okay? And so what you have in the Gospel of John, this guy says, okay, you know what? I'm just going to do magic tricks. And hopefully by performing these astonishing tricks, people will come to realize that I'm relatively okay, that they can embrace wisdom. You know how difficult it is for me to stand here day after day talking about this stuff to people? Imagine if I had the power to kind of all of a sudden have donuts in my hands and then pass them out. By Wednesday, this class will be filled up. Because people are not about understanding. People are about having a feel-good moment. And what Jesus wants to tell all of us, I suppose, in the Gospel of Mark is, if you are looking for wisdom, it's going to get bloody. You're going to get bloody. And what's significant about pain is that you always go through pain alone. No one's going to accompany you. If any of you in this class have ever had a heartache, toothache, body ache of any kind, you lay in your bed alone. You're grieving alone. That's how it is. Now, what's interesting about the Gospel of Judas is that you have a man who knows what wisdom is. He's lived through the Gospel of Mark scenario. The Matthew scenario, that I've talked to my father, he just doesn't get it. I've talked to my friends who are not bloodline, they just don't get it. I've also kind of just opened myself up completely, allowed them to see what lives inside me. Magic trick. They still don't get it. And so he says, if my purpose in life is to teach, but there are no customers, what's going to happen? Now, imagine if I was to tell you, I know you don't live in Oakland. Imagine if I was to tell you, I'm going to open up a bookstore, International on 48th. It's a relatively rough neighborhood, okay? Lots of decent people, but it's rough nevertheless. And if you were to ask me, what kind of books you're going to have? Say about Bible and philosophy and science and architecture, those things. Yeah, I don't really think that's going to work well. Well, then I ask you, what sort of bookstore should I put there? You should just forget the bookstore. Put a porn shop there or a drug shop there. You'll become a millionaire, by the end of the week. Okay. And so imagine if I didn't know that, and I have a lot of false hope. And false hope means the following. Imagine I'm an alcoholic, but you and I have a really, really good first date. I don't drink though. Imagine I'm an alcoholic, but on our second date, I drink just a little bit. And by the third date, you fall in love with me. And you go home and your fantasies about marriage, about moving in together, having children and all that stuff. See, you have hope in something you don't really understand. And so what happens? You and I will get married, we'll have children. As a mother, you will sit back and watch me abusing you, abusing the children, and eventually you have to figure out how to escape this poisonous environment. What you have in the Gospel of Judas is very, very, very fascinating, because he has for the first time come to understand the nature of the human being. Human beings do not desire light. They like assumptions. They enjoy belief systems. They like imitations. The idea that the kingdom of God lives inside you, go look for that. That's too much work. So there comes a point where he says to Judas, remember, this is a man who started his missionary work with a good amount of hope. Like all of us in this class, you start any new relationship with hope. then something very strange happens to us. As time passes and as your relationship evolves or devolves, you say, you know what? I don't want to be with this person anymore. And what you're doing metaphorically is what Jesus did in the Gospel of Judas. The relationship is dead to you. You walk away from it. Now, the difference between you or me and Jesus is this. My relationship is only to you. That's the only relationship I have. You are my wife or my companion. I lose my hope in this relationship, so I walk away. It's very different than Jesus because Jesus sees the entire human race as his family. Okay? Now, he's not really occupying the entire planet. He's only in Jerusalem and Nazareth. So he has access to maybe, let's just say, 5 million people on a planet that occupies like 60 million. He only has 5 million, supposedly, okay? Now, when he says, I no longer want to do this, please, let me die. Because I see someone with my eyes, with my sense of vision, and they give me the illusion that they are interested. They give me hope. I walk to them, I give them a piece of wisdom, and it gets trashed, and my hope dies. It seems that the body is the creator of all sorts of illusions. I read a book, it's inspiring, and my assumption is I can go all the way. Another illusion. And he says, you know what? I don't want to do that anymore. He just ends it. He goes to Judas and says, inside me lives the spirit. It's free. It's uncontaminated. It has no desires for any of the material stuff down here. But as long as I live in my body, there are obstacles, And so Judas gives him away, and he's dead, and he's free. He goes back home. Now, I think in many ways, if you were to kind of bring that book to your life, it could kind of be put in this particular way, that let's say this classroom suffocates you, my voice suffocates you, what I talk about suffocates you, everything about me just is very unpleasant to you. What do? There comes a point where you say, no, I don't think he's going to change at 9:35 or 9:40 or 9:50. You pack up your stuff and you leave. And the moment you step out of this door or this classroom, you look up there is a sun, there is fresh air, you say, thank God. You won't even care about the grade. You won't care about any of that stuff. And that's how we deal with almost everything under the sun. And you don't have to make Jesus into this like wisdom guy, who was the Messiah, who was God, who was this, who was that. Just make it very, very simple. If you have ever had anything that was worth sharing to anybody, because you had a lot of investment, emotional investment, intellectual investment, physical investment, when you did share that with someone, what happened to it? It got trashed, okay? What happened when you even wept, pleaded, begged for this person to kind of honor what you have shared with them? It gets trashed even more. And eventually what happens? There's a good amount of conflict. Should I give him some more chances? Should I continue the hope, keep it alive, or should I walk away? And if you pay attention to your life, all of us eventually walk away. Now, this walking away could be for 10 minutes until emotions subside, hope, the illusion of hope comes back, you try again, and it becomes a failure. Okay. I think it was the Greek philosopher, Seneca. Seneca is, after the death of Socrates, philosophy kind of went into these different branches. One of the branches that came out of philosophy, or Socratic philosophy, is called Stoicism. Stoicism is the idea that none of us in this class can control the external world. It's impossible. You can't control me, Stacy. The truth is I'm a jerk, let's just say. And everything that comes out of my mouth is foul, it's wrong, and it's going to rub you the wrong way. Now, you also need to know that you need this class to graduate. You have a couple of options. You can either listen to me, and every word that comes out of my mouth and reaches your ears, you have all these negative emotions that are happening inside you. And then this class that is only for an hour and 15 minutes because you don't really like me very much, it'll feel as if you've been here for about 10 hours. And you leave the classroom stressed, agitated, angry, frustrated, because all the emotions I just mentioned, agitation, frustration, anxiety, and all those, has to do with the fact that you don't really have power to control your circumstances. You know, whenever you lose control, you have these negative emotions come about. So power is the most important thing you need in your life. Without power, you won't get anywhere, right? Now, the Stoics believe that, listen, since you can't control the world, maybe we should focus on controlling the way you experience things and the way you want to react to the things you experience. I'm a jerk, fine. But how do you want to react to it? Do you need this class? If the answer is yes, pretend. Pretend well, in a healthy way. If you can't do that, I'll give you a hint. Let's say you don't like me and you don't like anything I say. That's okay. Try not to be like me. Because I assure you, whatever wrong you see in me when you have conversations with your parents, with your friends, with your family members, you have certain moments where you behave like me. Try to pay attention to those things. Try not to be like me. And all of a sudden you realize, yes, you don't like me, but you look at me as a rat. Let me study Amir Sabzvari so I don't turn out to be like him, another rat. Okay? So, the most difficult thing about the Stoics and their philosophy is that you have to summon up, or you have to come up with tools where you can detach yourself from emotions. You can detach yourself from wrong thinking that leads into wrong emotions and then wrong acting. You know, sometimes I have Muslim students and I tell them there is a Quran in the museum in France that has 116 chapters. See, I'm a student of these things and I like to learn. You know, I don't much care about belief systems. They don't do much for me. It's learning that I enjoy and it's understanding that I enjoy, not so much just feeling good. And so my Muslim students all of a sudden flip. They get really, really upset and angry. Some of them even drop the class. Why? Because for them, the Quran is sacred. Okay? But Quran is nothing but words. And words are nothing but layers of interpretation. And that has to do with who you are, what your maturity stage is, you know, where you've come from, you know. So if you happen to have come from a white brotherhood, for example, you're going to look at Genesis, Adam, and you're going to say, well, Adam is a white guy. You know, if you happen to be Native American, you're going to say, well, the earth is like red, brown. God is really talking about red man and brown man, for example, you know. So again, the difficulty of being a good Stoic is you have to remove yourself from emotions. The problem with emotions is that they actually feel good being angry. It feels good to cry. It feels good to mope around. It feels good to give up. It feels good to be inspired. You know, in the words of Aristotle, I suppose, if he was a Stoic, he would say being a good Stoic means being on this middle path. You know, you don't laugh out loud and you're not like sorrowful. You're like in the middle. Your mouth is like grinning. You know, your eyes are twinkling, but you're not really laughing and you're not really crying. You're right in the middle. You know, because the thing about emotions is that they have no stability, they have no permanence. You may be angry right now, 10 minutes later, you won't be angry anymore. Hello, Zain. How are you?
Okay, how are you?
Good. Your shoes match your sweater. Was that on purpose?
Yeah.
Good for you. What was her name?
Betty.
How's Betty?
She's a loser.
No, how is he? How is she?
Oh, she's good.
Yeah?
But it's going everywhere.
Man, that's awful. I mean, that's great for you. Um, yeah, so it's very difficult to be able to kind of detach yourself from emotions and then soberly think and reflect about why you're feeling a certain way, what the forces have been in your physical environment that have inspired those kinds of feelings, and not get consumed by them. And instead of reacting, you act. And there's a difference between acting and reacting. Reacting is when the environment just pushes buttons about you and you just kind of just do whatever. Acting is you kind of think about the environment, you reflect, you observe, you analyze, and then you say, okay, I have all these options. How do I want to do this? So it's kind of like being a good architect. You study the land, you realize how much space you have. If you want a one-story or a two-story, that depends on how old you are. If you're 70, there's a good chance you may want a one-story because you don't want to climb the stairs at your age. So that's what a good architect is, where you have to kind of pay attention to almost a lot of different things, which for us is really just troublesome and nearly impossible because there are invisible components around.